Okay. Hi, good evening, everybody.
Good
Um,
evening.
so Mike asked me, I guess we were chatting on Sunday morning before Minion started. Um, what was the point of teaching that material from the Mishnah before getting into the actual liturgy? And who cares if it's a long blessing or a short blessing or whatever. And so the point that I was trying to make is that our liturgy or the structure of the Siddur is very, very ancient. It's not just a bunch of guys who came up with this last week, but the structure and the content, even if there have been changes over the years, but it is more or less the same way we've been praying for like 2,000 years. And I mean, some people could say, "Oh, this is so old, let's get rid of it." But for people like me, the fact of its antiquity, and this is just not like something that somebody postulates. I mean, it is a fact. It is a known fact because we have the Mishnah. We know that the Mishnah was codified around the year 200 of the Common Era. So we know that it's at least 1800 and change years old. And to me, that's kind of impressive. Um, what I want to do again, so tonight we're going to look at the Shema, or at least beginning or look at the Shema. And when it says Shema in these texts, it doesn't mean just that one line, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. It means the three paragraphs of Kriyat Shema. Okay, so once again, I want to look. Actually, this is the Mishnah right before what we looked at last week. Um, and I'm gonna kind of zip through this. Um, but this is the very first Mishnah in Tractate Brachot, okay, and that is the laws of prayer, okay, and this is how it starts. From what time may one recite the Shema in the evening? Okay, now you'll notice that it doesn't attempt to prove that you have to say the Shema. That's assumed, right? The question is, what is the time, right? Because we know that there are like certain times, right? Because there's the evening prayer, there's the morning prayer, there's the afternoon prayer. So they have to be said at certain specific times. From the time that the priests enter their houses in order to eat their truma. Okay, the truma is like special sanctified food. Basically, this just means nightfall. Okay, I could spend a lot of time on this, but it's not directly relevant. Until the end of the first watch, the words of Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, now, first watch, okay, these prayers, right, because they're determined according to sunrise and sunset, and the length of the day is not uniform, right? It's not 12 hours of sunlight year round, and it's not 12 hours of darkness year round. So that an hour is what's called a halachic hour. So a halachic hour during the daytime is a twelfth of the time from sunrise until sunset. And at night, from sunset until sunrise, a twelfth of it. So the first watch, there are three watches of 4 hours each. Okay, so um, Rabbi Eliezer says your deadline for finishing the Shema is at the end of the first watch, meaning the fourth hour into night, or about a third of the night. The sages say until midnight. Rabban Gamliel says until dawn. Okay, so you've got three different, right? When is the last time for the Shema? Now, this is cute. Once it happened that his sons came home late from a wedding feast, and they said to him, "We have not yet recited the evening Shema." Okay, just imagine, right? These teenagers, right? They're drunk, right? They're coming from, "Oh, Dad, by the way, we didn't say the Shema," right? So he said to them, "If it is not yet dawn, you are still obliged to recite." And not in respect to this alone did they so decide, but wherever the sages say until midnight, the mitzvah may be performed until dawn. Okay, so they say until midnight, but you've actually got a little bit longer, right? You've got like this grace period. Skip the next one. Why then did the sages say until midnight? In order to keep a man far from transgression, right? So if you have a question, just hop in because I can't see everybody. So ideally it should be midnight, but actually could be even later. From what time may one recite the Shema in the morning, right? What is the earliest Shema in the morning? From the time that one can distinguish between blue and white. Okay, now, question for this. Why is that like a useful metric, the time that you can distinguish between blue and white? Anybody have any idea? Yes, Sue.
I'm just thinking that maybe it's much harder to tell the difference between blue and green. It would have to be lighter than it would be to distinguish between blue and white.
Correct. I mean, that's right. That's pretty self-evident, right? It's easier to discern, right? The difference between blue and white is much larger than the difference between blue and green, right? But anything else? All right, what do you put on before you pray?
Talit.
Talit.
Right, a talit, a talis, and tefillin, right? So, all right, what does that have to do with blue and white?
Well, you could make the distinction.
Right, at this time they had
to look at.
Right, because you have the blue thread, right? They were using the blue thread in their talis. So you've got a built-in what I call a dawnometer, right? You don't have to go looking for two threads. You've got it right there. You've got your talit, which has the fringes on the corner, and in that you've got a blue thread and the rest are white. So you've got it right there. It's a useful metric, okay? And he must finish it by sunrise, okay, which would be pretty early. You'd have to daven, right? If you have to finish davening by sunrise, half the time we don't even get up by sunrise. Rabbi Joshua says until the third hour of the day, for such is the custom of the children of kings to rise at the third hour. Okay, well, what does the custom of the children of kings have to do with anything?
How long they might sleep in, or what time they might get up.
Right, okay, but so what does that have to do with us? It's saying the children of kings. All right, what does this say about every Jew? Right, every Jew is the child of a king, right? And every Jew is a prince or a princess, right? And princes and princesses get to sleep in, right? So we get to sleep in too. because we are children of the King, and the King doesn't treat us harshly, making us get up before dawn just to say his praises, right? We get to sleep late, right? I mean, if you're a commuter on Metro, maybe not, but it's an important theological statement, I think, that every Jew is a prince or a princess. Well, a prince anyway. If one recites the Shema later, he loses nothing like one who reads in the Torah, right? So if you miss the last deadline, say it anyway, right? You might not get credit for saying the Shema on time, but the Shema comes from Torah, so you're still studying Torah. Okay, now I'm going to finish up with this last paragraph, which I love. This could be my favorite paragraph in the entire Mishnah. All right. Beit Shammai say, right? We know about Hillel and Shammai, right? So Beit Shammai say, in the evening, every man should recline and recite the Shema, and in the morning he should stand, as it says, when you lie down and when you get up, or when you rise up, right? So Shammai says, right, because that's what it says in the Shema, right? You should say them when you lie down and when you rise up. So Shammai says, yes, when you're saying the Shema at night, you should lie down to replicate that. And when you say the Shema in the morning, you should stand to replicate that. But Beit Hillel says every man should recite in his own way, as it says, and when you walk by the way, right? So if you're going to take it literally, right, then you've got also, it says when you, or as I learned it when I was a kid, when thou walkest by the way, right? So you should maintain that you should be walking when you say the Shema. So it can't possibly mean literally. Why then is it said, and when you lie down and when you get up? It means at the time when people lie down and at the time when people rise up, right? Which is what we do, right? We have the evening Shema and the morning Shema. Why? From this line, right? That's what tells us to say it twice and when, right? Rabbi Tarfon said, I was once walking by the way, and I reclined to recite the Shema according to the words of Beit Shammai, and I incurred danger from robbers. Okay, I listened to Beit Shammai, I laid down to say the Shema, and robbers came and got me. And they said to him, you deserve to come to harm because you acted against the words of Beit Hillel, right? Serves you right. Because we know, right? We don't know from this text, but we know from elsewhere that there were endless disputes between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And the halacha is always according to Beit Hillel, but Rabbi Tarfon acted according to Beit Shammai. Robbers attacked him and they said, serves you right, right? Serves you right. They had a lot of compassion on him. I don't know. So anyway, I'm going to stop the sharing at this point. So any questions? Yeah, Sue.
So I'm a little confused. So the Shema goes all the way back to the Torah. And I don't understand why some of these things weren't worked out centuries before Hillel. Like didn't anybody that lived, 300 years before the destruction of the temple, or at any point, didn't they have sages at that time that debated and responded to some of the questions that we see later on?
All right, that is an excellent question. And I think the answer to that is no, okay? Because Rabbinic Judaism, and that's what we're talking about, right? Rabbinic Judaism was only developing at the end of the Second Temple period, right? And I mean, again, I didn't want to get too bogged down, but this business about, timing the Shema to the Kohanim and so on, and as we'll see when we get to the Amida and to other, our prayers are a substitute for sacrifice. Okay? And so by talking about the Kohanim in the time that we say the Shema, the Mishnah is making that connection. Okay? And you'll see we say the Amida, right, according to the schedule of the sacrifices, right? Like there are certain days, for example, I mean, this is getting ahead, but you all come to shul at least sometimes, so you know this, right? There are certain days when we say Musaf and certain days when we don't, right? Most days we don't say Musaf, but Shabbat and holidays and Rosh Chodesh, we say Musaf, right? What does Musaf mean? It means additional. Okay, why do we say Musaf on those specific days?
Plus, there used to be a sacrifice.
Well, there was a sacrifice every day, but there was the Musaf sacrifice
It was an
on
additional
those days.
sacrifice, right?
Right. So, and that's why the liturgy of the Musaf, the wording of the Musaf is explicitly tied to sacrifices, right? Tikanta Shabbat Ratzita Korbanoteha, right? You established Shabbat and you wanted its sacrifice, right? I mean, the Musaf is very explicitly connected to sacrifice, right? So the answer, I mean, look, I mean, if you look at this from an ahistorical point of view, then the answer to your question should be yes, right? Because from an ahistorical or orthodox point of view, I mean, everybody from Jacob on davened 3 times a day, right? I don't think so. Okay. But in reality, rabbinic Judaism, so the whole order is just, starting at the end of the Second Temple period. Okay. Now, having said that, I mean, there's a larger question, which is, why isn't this resolved? And the fact that, I mean, there are certain things that are still unresolved, right? Like I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago on Shabbos morning. We're in Adar 1, right? There are 2 months of Adar. If somebody dies in Adar in a non-leap year, right? If somebody dies in a leap year, if they die in Adar 1, their yortzeit is in Adar 1. If they die in Adar 2, their yortzeit is in Adar 2. And both of those yortzeits in a non-leap year are in Adar because it's the only Adar that there is, right? But what about somebody who dies in Adar in a non-leap year? And now it's a leap year. Is their yortzeit Adar 1 or Adar 2? Okay, and this is still an unresolved question, right? I mean, my position is Adar 2 because that's the real Adar, because that's when Purim falls, right? But other rabbis say no, Adar 1, because you don't skip a mitzvah when you have the opportunity to say it, right? And so why would you delay saying Kaddish by a whole month, right? So there are certain things that are still like not completely resolved, okay? So I think that's really the answer. That's why it's not resolved, right? And that's why the Mishnah preserves divergent opinions, right? And then when you get into the Talmud, it's nothing but divergent opinions, right? So that even in theory, something could be settled law, and then the situation changes, and you can go back and find different opinions, and it could be revised again. All right, so now let's look in your prayer book, and whatever page you have the Shema in. All right, so, and we're going to read this like word for word, and however long it takes us, that's how long it takes us. It's not like we have to cram for finals or something, right? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Okay, so now the first thing is that, right, if you ask most Jews, right, what is the most important prayer in Judaism, they would say the Shema, right? Right? Now, what's the problem with saying that this is the most important prayer in Judaism?
It's not a prayer.
It's not exactly a prayer.
It's not a prayer. Why is it not a prayer?
No, Baruch Atah, I don't know.
No, there's plenty of prayers that don't. It's not a bracha, okay? A bracha has to have Baruch Atah Adonai. But you can have prayers that aren't Baruch Atah Adonai.
It's not aimed at God, it's aimed at people.
Exactly, right? It's not,
right.
right? A
It's
prayer
not.
is aimed at God,
It's not.
right? This is not aimed at God. This is aimed at the people of Israel, right? So it's totally not a prayer, right? I don't know what exactly it is, but it's not a prayer, right? And you could call it maybe a creed. I don't know, right? But it's definitely not a prayer. Okay, so the word Shema, right? The word Shema, like, we generally translate it as hear, right? And, and certainly, right, in modern Hebrew, right, if I wanted to say, I can't hear you, right? Like if I'm in a Zoom meeting, ani lo shomea, right? I can't hear, right? But Shema doesn't only mean hear, right? If you look at the second paragraph of the Shema, right? V'haya im shamoa tishma'u el mitzvotai, right? And it translates here, if you will earnestly heed the mitzvot that I give you this day, right? So lishmoa also means to obey. Okay, now interestingly, there is no word in biblical Hebrew for obey. Okay, there's just not. Okay, and that, it could be because you're dealing with Jews and we don't like to obey, right? But there is no word in biblical Hebrew for obey. All right, and so when Zionism arose and modern Hebrew was developed, and they started having armies, right? So they had to come up with a word in Hebrew that means to obey, right? Because, like, the way of obedience in traditional Jewish thought, right, is that you think about it, right? You think about it and you give like informed consent, right? But that's not what you need in the army, right? In the army, your commander tells you to do something and you do it. So they had to go back to Aramaic, like when they're trying to create a word in Hebrew that doesn't exist. So they came up with the word litzayet, but that means to obey, right? But here, lishmoa means to hear, but it also means to obey, but it also means to understand, right? I mean, there are places in the Bible where the word or the root shin mem aleph means to understand, right? So it means all those things, right? Which is one of the reasons why praying in Hebrew is better than praying in English, assuming that you know Hebrew, because you don't have to choose one of those meanings. Okay, so Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, right? Adonai, right? And there is no verb to be in the present tense in Hebrew either. So literally, right, which is again how I grew up with it, it said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Right? But here it says, "Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God," right? They fill in that is. Adonai alone. Okay. Now, what's the difference between Adonai? Why does it say Adonai Echad, Adonai alone, right? I mean, we all know the word Echad, it means one, right? So why would they translate it as Adonai alone rather than Adonai is one? Or why, I mean, for that matter, why Adonai instead of like the Lord, which is what we all grew up with? I mean, again, there's no right or wrong answer here. I just, want to give people an opportunity to, share their thoughts. All right. Well, the saying Adonai in the English rather than the Lord, that's easy, right? Because the Lord is masculine, right? And we have, increasingly sought to degender our texts, which is hard because Hebrew is a gendered language. But Adonai actually is masculine too. But um, but the point is that, right, we believe that God is neither masculine, God is not male or female, right? So, but Lord is a masculine word, right? I mean, it's always Lord and Lady, so we get rid of that, right? But Ahad, I mean, the point is that Ahad in this context, or as we understand it now, this is not about math, right? God, there's one as opposed to two, or one as opposed to five, or one as opposed to 20, or one as opposed to 1,000. It is something about the very nature of God. So echad could also mean, in that sense, unique. Although in the original context, it probably did actually mean alone rather than one. Okay, I haven't had occasion to speak about this idea a lot recently because I haven't been teaching so much like specifically biblical stuff, right? But our early ancestors were probably not monotheists. Okay, there's two words that mean roughly the same thing, either monolatry or henotheism. Okay, I'm going to stick with henotheism. Henotheism means that there are possibly many gods, all right, but we only worship one, right? There could be other gods, but we only worship one, okay? And in fact, each god has control over a specific area, okay? And if you say, well, that's crazy, right? In the Babylonian exile, right, our ancestors said, right, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Right? How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And my question to them would be, why can't you sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And the answer is, because if we're deported to Babylonia, we have to worship the gods of Babylonia, right? And eventually they developed this idea that no, in other words, I think when they called Adonai the God of Israel, it originally meant the God either of the people Israel and only of the people Israel, right? Or the God of the land of Israel, the God of Canaan, right? But eventually, our ancestors developed the idea that no, God is the God of everyone and everywhere, right? And that gets us to, like we say at the end of the Aleinu, right? Bayom Hahu, on that day, Yehiye Adonai Echad Ushemo Echad, right? Adonai will be one and his name will be one, right? Which means that everybody will know that name of God and everybody will worship that God, right? But throughout the Bible, there is this idea that there are other gods, right? But our God is the strongest, our God is the best, right? But Judaism evolves, right? Judaism evolves. And so, it has many different meanings, right? But if you tie that to Bayom Hahu, right, then God is or will be eventually the God of all humanity, right? Any questions or comments on this? Right? But it can mean all of those things. I mean, let me just quickly, what does it mean to you? What does this line mean to you? I mean, you've said it how many times in your life? All right, if it doesn't mean anything to you, why are you saying it?
It means that whatever God is now always was, and I think everybody has their own version, but there's some essence that's common.
Okay, right. That's beyond, right? I mean, our ideas of God may change, but that doesn't mean God changes, right? And they're right. Different people have different ideas, but there is an essence beyond those ideas. Okay, Mike, you were starting to say something, but you were muted.
Tails, I had no idea. So it's Adonai Eloheinu Adonai, our God, Adonai Echad, the only God.
Right. So our God is the only God.
To me, that's what it means, is that there's one God.
Right. And we're the ones who have it right.
There is one God. Adonai is our God. It doesn't speak to what others do unless they're looking at golden calves.
Right. Although, I mean, that last line of the Aleinu is triumphalist, right? Everybody's going. I mean, maybe not everybody's going to be Jewish, but everybody's going to worship the Jewish God. I mean, which is fine. I mean, I believe that too. But we often walk around saying, "Oh, Christians and Muslims, they're so triumphalist, and we're much more open-minded." I don't know that we are. We haven't had the ability so much to force our religion by force on others as Christians and Muslims have. But I'm not sure that we've had less of a desire to do so. We've only had less of an ability to do so. Because there have been instances where we did forcibly convert people.
I mean, we make it difficult to convert.
Now, because we're oppressed.
Because what?
Because we're oppressed. And people could be, I mean, we're still, maybe not so much now, but we're still operating under that mindset of oppression. Okay. For example, the shtetl where my grandfather was born, Ilya, in Belarus. Okay. Ilya is famous as the burial place of Count Potocki, okay, from like the 1700s. He was known as the Vilna Gertzedek. He was a Russian nobleman who converted to Judaism and for his troubles was burned at the stake. Okay. And he was buried in the shtetl where my grandfather was born. Okay. That's his main claim to fame. Okay. Actually, and the Vilna Gaon actually wanted to be buried next to him, but wasn't. Okay. But, when converting to Judaism could get you burned at the stake, right, which in world historical terms was as recently as last week, basically, then you're not going to encourage people to convert, right? As well as the fact that people maybe are infiltrating the Jewish community, right? And you want to, so, yeah, we make it hard to convert, but there have been periods of time when we did actually convert people by force. Herod's parents were converted by force. They were the Edomites. Okay, it didn't turn out too well for us. But all right, anybody else on what the Shema means? This line, yes, Sue.
Well, I'm just wondering where it says like Adonai Echad, and also the end of the Aleinu. Could we possibly look at it that everybody, including Hindus, worship the same God, but they all interpret what he's like differently, so that Christians will see him in the form of a three-person God. A Hindu has a major God, and they consider the other gods kind of each one representing a characteristic or a trait. So couldn't we say that in the Aleinu that everybody may end up worshiping the same God, but like interpreting who he is or how he should be worshiped in or her in a different fashion?
Yeah, I like that very much, right? And if you look at, I mean, like educated Hindus, right, who really know their stuff, will tell you that, yeah, of course, there's only one God, exactly as you said, right? And these statues are they're not different deities; they're just different aspects of the one God, and they help us concentrate and focus on our prayers, right? I mean, we look at this and we say, oh, idols, right? Because our tradition had. But having said that, there is a Trinitarian way of reading the Shema. Okay. I mean, and if you ever get into an argument with a Jew for Jesus, they may pull this out. Okay. And I'll show you how it's done. Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Right? Adonai Eloheinu Adonai 3. Echad, 1. The 3 are 1. Right? I mean, I have to say, right, as somebody who's studied Christianity in depth for a long time, the idea of the Trinity still makes no sense to me. Right? None whatsoever. Right? Or the idea of the incarnation. But Christians, right, Christian missionaries will in fact read this as saying that the 3 are 1, right? Which is exactly the Trinity that you discussed. Yeah, Michael.
So in the morning service, the weekday morning service, right before during the Sukkot de Zimra, when we get to Baruch She'amar, Rabbi Scroll has it written that we say this Hineni thing, and the thrust of it is toward the unification of our God.
Right.
And I think Kabbalistically, they have this view that we also have different faces of our God. I don't know if it's 3 or not, but
No, there's 12.
what?
There's 12, the 12 Sefirot.
12. Ah,
Right.
okay. Oh, I don't know. Is that 12 faces of God, or is that just 12 levels
12, no, 12 aspects, 12 different functions of God.
Oh, okay.
Right. No, that Hineni Muchanu Mizuma, and that is a Kabbalistic invocation that is not part of the original Siddur. Right.
Sure
And it
not.
says, right, L'Shem Yichud, it's in Aramaic,
Right.
L'Shem Yichud Kucha Brichu Ushchinte. Right.
Right.
For the sake of the unification of the Blessed Holy One and his Shekhinah, right? And that is purely Lurianic Kabbalah, that that God and the Shekhinah are basically lovers who are separated, right? And it is our task to bring them together, right? And this gets back to the class a few weeks ago on the Chabad tunnels, and I connected it to Messianism and to the whole theurgistic theology of Chabad, which is that and it's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful, and if they're right, more power to them, right? Every time a Jew does a mitzvah, sparks of divinity are released from their imprisonment and reunited with the Godhead, right? And where I call that theurgistic is that there is a certain tipping point that is written into the design of the universe from creation, that when we hit that tipping point, God has no choice but to send the Messiah, right? And therefore, to get you to put on tefillin one time, great. So who knows whether that one time that you put on tefillin won't exactly be the mitzvah that tips the scale and brings Mashiach. It's great. I mean, the idea that our task is to bring Mashiach, right? There's nothing more beautiful than that, right? I mean, I might think that there are other ways to do it, but that, that's what we're put on earth to do, right? What could be more beautiful than that, right? Okay, so let's go on to a little bit more. Obviously, we're not going to finish this tonight, right? Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. You shall love Adonai your God, right? Now, question. We are commanded to love God, right? Here's my question. How can love is an emotion, right? How can you be commanded to have a certain emotion?
It's tough. And you've also made that comment about when the Kohanim do the priestly blessing.
Right. When the Kohanim come up to do the priestly blessing, right? Now, what's unique about that is the only mitzvah that has to be performed with love, right? It's Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu livarech et amo Yisrael ba'ahava, right? The Kohanim say, who has commanded us to bless your people Israel with love, right? And if you don't love those Jews that you're blessing, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, right? And I guess if you don't love God, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, right?
Israel. Oh, he just means the Jewish people.
Right. Israel means the Jewish people.
I'm
right?
sorry.
No, that's okay. I can hear. No, that's fine. So listen, Mike, I'm going to ask you a question, right? Because we're commanded to feel a certain way, right? Let's imagine that Bobby is upset with you. And you
Never.
say, oh, Bobby. No, I'm saying imagine, right? Bobby, don't feel that way. Right? How successful is that going to be?
She says not.
Right. I know. All right. I tell Kelly, don't feel that. I don't do that anymore because I'm capable of learning. Right. But when we were newlyweds, and I would say, oh, Kelly, don't feel that way. It's not very successful. You cannot tell another person how to feel. Right. So how can the Torah command us to feel a certain way?
And it happens in the Ten Commandments, the first commandment. How can we be commanded according to that first commandment if what you're asking has any validity? But it's the basis without which the rest of it stops making a whole lot of sense. And I mean, that's just how religion is. You either buy into
there's
it,
nothing in the
the
Ten
first thing you have to
Commandments.
buy into is that there's a God.
Right. No, but that's different. I mean, I could believe that I could buy into there's a God, but I don't love him.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
For
I get
sure,
that.
yes.
For sure. Right? I mean, look, how many times, I mean, how many times have I talked to somebody who suffered, a loss, or somebody who's sick or whatever, and they say, I'm mad at God or I hate God, right? Um, Very common, right? But the first commandment, which, by the way, I mean, we're talking about the most important prayer in Judaism, which isn't a prayer, right? The first commandment isn't a commandment, right? Ani, right? Anochi Adonai Elohecha. I am Adonai your God. That's a statement. It's not a commandment, right? But statement or commandment, it's not about how you feel. It's a statement about what exists, right? Or what is claimed to exist, right? And then if you say, you shall have no other gods before me, right? That's still not feeling, right? I don't think, I mean, I have to go back and look at it, but I don't think there's any place in the 10 Commandments or 9 commandments plus one statement that we're commanded to feel a certain way, right? But here it seems we are commanded to have a certain emotion, right? So here's what I'm going to say, and actually I'm going to connect it to that, to the second commandment, right? Um, there are other places in the Bible, particularly in the historical books, where it talks about loving a king, right? And there are ancient Near Eastern treaties where a subordinate noble promises to love a higher noble or a king, right? And in this context, love does not mean, oh, I love you so much, I'm going to buy you flowers and send you Valentines, right? Love, in this case, it's a political term and it means to be loyal to. It means to be loyal to. And that's exactly the same. I can't hear.
I said it means MAGA.
No.
That's
It's
that's
not
what,
Hebrew.
but that's what it is buying in purely on a basis of loyalty.
Yeah, except, I mean, you brought it up, so I'll respond in the same terms, right? Here's the difference between God and MAGA, okay? Is that when we are loyal to God, God returns that loyalty, right? Not so with MAGA, right? God doesn't throw us under the bus as soon as it becomes convenient, right? That's the difference. But it does mean loyalty, right? And again, if you understand that at this time our ancestors did not exclude the possible existence of other gods, all right, they might exist, but I don't worship them, right? I'm going to be loyal to Adonai, and I'm not going to say, well, maybe some other God will come along and offer me a better deal, right? My loyalty is exclusively to God, right? And that is another difference between God and MAGA, because MAGA has replaced God. Shema has replaced God. It's idolatry. I mean, it's sometimes literally
Mhm.
idolatry. So, you shouldn't have gotten me started. But um, but there, but I mean, there is, but the point is, right? The point is that loyalty is reciprocated, right? And I forgot to mention this, right? But right, so we wear tefillin, right? And tefillin has the same verses as the Shema, right? According to the Talmud, God also wears tefillin, but where our tefillin says Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, right? God's tefillin says Mi ka'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz, right? Who is like your people Israel, a unique echad, a unique nation in the world, right? So God returns that loyalty. That's what God has in his tefillin, right? We have a tefillin that proclaim our loyalty to God, and God has tefillin that proclaims his loyalty to us, right? Because it is a covenant, and a covenant is like the key idea of the whole Torah.
It's fascinating. I
Right.
never heard that before.
Oh, yeah. All right. So we have a little bit more of the Shema to complete, which we'll do over the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much. And Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you and Yashikoah.
Thank you.
Toda
Night.
Rabah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Lila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Lila
Lila
Tov.
Tov.
Lila Tov.